Hello, St. Mark's Faith Formation crew. Good to be with you today virtually. You've maybe gathered, some of you have already been to the 8:30 service today, that I'm not here in the flesh, but that can't stop me from bringing you the conclusion to our course on Daniel. I've enjoyed doing this over these last, oh gosh, what is this, week 5, week 6? I've lost track, but it's been good to spend time together in God's Word learning. So I appreciate you sticking with me, and I appreciate your patience through this digital format today, which will no doubt mean less conversation. But we've come this far, and I just wanted to finish it out. So I appreciate you being patient with the format, and thanks to Cantor David for setting up our audio visual today. We've all learned so many new skills through this pandemic, and now, hey, we get to make use of some of those, right? So thank you to Cantor David. Let me finagle my technology here to make sure that that you're seeing the right screen. Okay, you should be seeing the correct screen now. We're gonna finish out the last 3 chapters of the book of Daniel today. And you know, we sort of rushed through chapter 9 last week at the end, where basically Daniel prays, and then the angel Gabriel shows up and talks to Daniel after the prayer, and you know, says some things about the timelines, that things that Daniel prayed for are going to come to pass, and those maybe line up in some accountings with the length of time between when the captivity of the people started and when things go sort of back to normal. So that's our recap on chapter 9 that we rushed through last time. Starting off this week, we're going to look at chapter 10. This is the beginning of chapter 10. In the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. The word was true, and it concerned a great conflict. He understood the word, having received understanding in the vision. At that time, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 weeks. I had eaten no rich food, no meat or wine had entered my mouth, and I had not anointed myself at all for the full 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I looked up and saw a man clothed in linen with a belt of gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like a beryl, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the roar of a multitude. I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. The people who were with me did not see the vision, though a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone to see this great vision. My strength left me, and my complexion grew deathly pale, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and when I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a trance, face to the ground. So, wow, yeah, a dramatic encounter with this one who was a man, right? Probably most folks agree that this is probably an angel in human form. Probably the angel Gabriel again, because we know that the angel Gabriel is the one who in chapter 8 shows up and interprets the vision of the ram and the goat, right? And who gives that confusing timeline in chapter 8 for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. In chapter 9 gives the confusing timeline for the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and who interprets the ram and goat vision in chapter 8. Daniel is the only place in the Old Testament we get reference to the angel Gabriel, although, you know, in the New Testament too, we get 8 references to Gabriel, and particularly we think of the angel Gabriel showing up and telling Mary that she's going to be having a baby, right? So there are some Old Testament references. Well, there are some Hebrew references to the angel Gabriel, but not actually in part of the canon, right? So there is some Hebrew writing that gets collected into the book of Enoch, which is, we don't consider scriptural in terms of its authority, but it does have some interesting stories, and Gabriel plays in some of those. But if we're talking about our Bible, then Daniel is the only place that the angel Gabriel shows up. And so we're assuming here that this is the angel Gabriel we're talking about. That's a pretty common assumption to make. Okay, so with a belt of gold from Uphaz or Uphaz. Uphaz is not a place that anybody knows anything about, so that's sort of a lost reference at this point. We don't know what that refers to, but a belt of gold, his body like a beryl. I went, what's a beryl? I don't know what that means. Maybe you all know better than I. But a beryl, as it turns out, is it's a gem, right? Like an emerald or an aquamarine. Those are kinds of beryls. So I guess shiny is generally what his body is like. I mean, I'm assuming, unless the description means his body was crystalline, which I sort of am suspect of. Probably it means his body was shining or glimmering or beautiful, something like that, right? He's got a body like a beryl. There's not as many depictions of these parts of Daniel, even though we do get some pretty good descriptions of this one who shows up in the appearance of a man. So here Daniel is by the river. So here this artist has put the man on the river, the angel in the form of a man at least. On the river. It could be, we don't get that explicitly, but sure, why not? Artistic license, right? But the belt looks goldish, and generally he's got a shiny appearance to him. So yeah, okay. And then here in this one, I don't know, do you get the belt of gold again? What I do sort of enjoy about this one is that, I don't know if you can see real well, but he's sort of got like those laser looking eyes, like really shiny, weird eyes, which, yeah, maybe, okay. His face like lightning, right? His eyes like flaming torches. So yeah, okay, I'll take that laser eye look if it's supposed to be his eyes like flaming torches. And then here in this one, again, the artist takes that real shiny nature all the way around, makes the whole body really shiny, which I think might be appropriate since if the gemstone is supposed to be sort of glistening like a beryl, and you see the gold on the belt here. So yeah, I'll take it. And again, with this one, is he on the river? Is he in front of the river? But the river features prominently, which makes sense with the description since that's where Daniel says he was by the river. So Daniel sort of has all his energy sapped out of him by this encounter with the divine messenger. But then a hand touched me and roused me to my hands and knees. He said to me, Daniel, greatly beloved, pay attention to the words that I'm going to speak to you. Stand on your feet, for I have now been sent to you. So while he was speaking this word to me, I stood up trembling. He said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia. And I've come to help you understand what is to happen to your people at the end of days, for there is a further vision for those days. Interesting that almost always when there are encounters with angels or with God, what we hear is don't be afraid, right? And we get that here from presumably this angel, the one who shows up in the form of a man at least. Do not fear. And fear seems like a pretty reasonable response, all things considered, to an encounter with a heavenly being. But the heavenly being always seems to be saying, "Do not fear." And that's what Daniel is told. Um, Interesting references here in verse 13. Um, it's almost like the angel says, "Hey, I heard you. I would have been here sooner, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me for 21 days." Now, if you remember, if we run this back, 21 days is what Daniel had been, here in verse 2, Daniel had been mourning for 3 weeks. So for 21 days, Daniel's sort of been in this penitent mourning, right? And when the angel shows up, he says, "Oh, you've been heard, but it's been 21 days. I've been opposed by the prince of the kingdom of Persia." And we need to unpack that a little bit. Probably what this is referring to is an angelic prince. There's this idea in the ancient Near East that when two nations would go to war, generally they had their own gods, right? Each nation had their own gods. And so, yes, there was a battle playing out on the literal battlefields between humans, but it was understood that the victor in any sort of military conquest, they would be the one who won this battle, not necessarily just because of their own tactics, but because of the support of their deity, right? And so there's this idea that for every physical battle that goes on between two nations, there's also another battle happening between those two nations' deities. And if your deity wins, then you expect to win the actual battle on the ground too. So I think that's what we get this reference to here in the 13th verse, that the prince of the kingdom of Persia has been opposing Gabriel. And so that's why it took me so long to get here, because I've been dealing with him for 21 days, right? And here in verse 13, we also get Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia. So Michael is maybe handling that prince of Persia now. This is the first appearance of Michael, the angel Michael in Scripture. Michael is frequently thought of as an archangel, so sort of one of the head of the heavenly host. Prominent in Jewish thought as the protector of the Jewish people, and a lot of that comes from the way Michael is depicted here in the book of Daniel. And you also get references to the angel Michael in Revelation and in Jude, where Michael is prominent in fighting the forces of, well, we could say the forces of evil, we could say the devil, forces that defy God. But in any case, hey, I got here as soon as I could is the message to Daniel, and had some help from Michael, and come to help you understand what is to happen. And this seems to be Gabriel who's speaking, remember. This seems to be Gabriel's role pretty frequently, to reveal things to humanity is what Gabriel comes to do. I mean, think about the Annunciation, right? Gabriel is revealing to Mary that she's going to have a baby. So this is now Daniel speaking again. While he, presumably Gabriel, was speaking these words to me, I turned my face toward the ground and was speechless. Then one in human form touched my lips, and I opened my mouth to speak, and said to the one who stood before me, My Lord, because of the vision, such pains have come upon me that I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For I am shaking. No strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one in human form touched me and strengthened me. He said, Do not fear, greatly beloved. You are safe. Be strong and courageous. When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you know why I have come to you? Now I must return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I'm through with him, the prince of Greece will come. But I am to tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. there is no one with me who contends against these princes except Michael, your prince. So the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece, so we're referring to sort of a struggle against the deities of these places. And the Persians are the folks who are sort of the ruling empire in the narrative at the time. We got at the beginning of chapter 10 that we're in the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia. And the Persians rule for some time, and then Alexander the Great, runs the map on everybody. And so that's what we're getting here, a little preview of what's to come. Okay, so basically this whole of chapter 11 then, this visit from this one in the form of a human, probably Gabriel, it's just this long announcement of the truth of what's going on. I'm sorry, I should say we've switched chapters here, and I'm telling you now that having run through that chapter 10 encounter where Gabriel says, "I'm here to announce the, I'm here to," boy, this running the technology, I'm not doing well speaking. Let me just start over. So chapter 10, the angel Gabriel shows up, and probably the angel Gabriel in this vision, and Daniel's overcome. And then here in chapter 11, we get to the meat and potatoes of what Gabriel is actually here to do, right? To announce this truth. Thanks for your patience with me. And as in chapter 11, then this truth is laid out, it ends up being basically all of the details that are to come in world history, sort of in the Mediterranean, particularly in the Palestinian to Babylon area. It's all the details of this conflict that's gonna play out over hundreds of years. And it goes through all of the drama between the rulers, the rise and fall of rulers of these different empires, starting with Persians, right? And Alexander the Great, we get reference to that, the Greek, the prince of the Greeks, right? And then it takes that through after Alexander's death at an early age, his kingdom is divided into 4, right? And it follows all the way through in the Seleucid part of that kingdom. When it gets divided into 4, one of them is the Seleucids, and the Seleucids are the ones who stay in power in what we now think of as Israel and Palestine. And they have a large empire for a while, all the way down through Antiochus IV, remember, who's the one persecuting the people of the Jews, right? And in Jerusalem, Antiochus persecutes them starting around 167 or so. So just a word about the timeline again here. The scene is set at the beginning of chapter 10 that says we are in the 3rd year of Cyrus of Persia. So that's like 536 BC. So, it's been 50 years or more in this exile that the narrative is set in. And Antiochus's persecutions begin in the year 167. So there's almost 500 years, 470 years or whatever, of history here between the narrative context of the captivity and the historical context of the first hearers of Daniel's living in what's now Palestine and Israel under Antiochus. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. We'll circle back to that in a little bit. Just so you have a little bit of context in your head, here's a map for you. This is actually from the year 200. In the context of the people that Daniel is written to comfort, right? The ones living under the Seleucid persecution of Antiochus IV. That's not happening until about 167 BC. So this map is a little bit earlier than that. But the Seleucids, you can see, their empire basically goes from the south of Asia Minor and all the way down to Israel, Palestine, and then it goes east all the way basically to India. So it was still a significant empire, even though it was not the whole of Alexander's empire. And at this point, you see over on the left in the west, the Roman Republic is growing in strength, but they're still not the empire of the day. They are one powerful player. And then the other thing to notice is the Ptolemaic Empire, which is down in Egypt. The Seleucids and the Ptolemaics are enemies, and they fight for hundreds of years. And so a lot of what is walked through in chapter 11 as this truth is revealed about this great conflict, a lot of it has to do with the wars between the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt and the Seleucid Empire, leading up to the time Antiochus takes power. So again, here in the context of the narrative, everything that is about to be told by this one in human form is sort of predictive. It's going to be happening in the future. But everything that is being told in the context of when Daniel is written down is actually, it's all already happened, right? So I just wanted you to have those empires in your head. Here's the chapter 11. As for me, and me here is the one who looks like a human, right? Presumably Gabriel. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to support and strengthen him. Now I will announce the truth to you. 3 more kings shall arise in Persia. The 4th shall be far richer than all of them, and when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a warrior king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and take action as he pleases. And while still rising in power, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. So this is Alexander, right? The warrior king who rules with great dominion, still getting more powerful, but then he dies, in his early 30s. And his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted and go to others besides these. And that references the fact that Alexander didn't have a clear heir, and so other leaders divided up his territory. Then the king of the south shall grow strong, but one of his officers shall grow stronger. Then he shall rule a realm greater than his own realm. After some years, they shall make an alliance. So this just goes on for like 15 verses of the tracing the history from the fall of Alexander the Great for hundreds of years, and about the squabbles and intrigue between the rulers of these kingdoms. When we talk about the king of the south, we're talking about this Ptolemaic empire that was one of the 4 that took over for Alexander the Great. When we talk about the north or the east, usually we're talking about the Seleucids or the folks that oppose them in the east. So that's what's going on here, the king of the south. And you can go read this if you want to, and if you've got a good study Bible like an Oxford Annotated or a HarperCollins study Bible, it'll detail for you who exactly all these rulers are, but we're not going to walk through all of this. But this chart is just to say that up at the top, you see the 4 successors to Alexander the Great. When Alexander dies, these are the folks that take over the 4 parts of his kingdom. And the middle column is the text right out of the 11th chapter of Daniel here. And then on the left, you've got who was in charge in the northern kingdom. That would be the Seleucid kingdom that Antiochus IV is eventually going to be the ruler of and persecute the Jews. And then on the left, you've got the southern kingdom, who's in charge there, and sort of what are the what are the events being narrated here in the 11th chapter. But I'm just going to skip ahead to verse 21, where we eventually get to Antiochus IV. And, it's talking about one of the rulers of the Seleucid Empire. And then in his place shall arise a contemptible person on whom royal majesty had not been conferred. And that's sort of referring to Antiochus's predecessor gets assassinated, probably, is what happens. And so Antiochus is seen as a usurper in some ways, but basically the Jews are just mad at him because he's been terrible to them. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom through intrigue. Armies shall be utterly swept away and broken before him, and the prince of the covenant as well. And after an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully and become strong with a small party. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province and do what none of his predecessors had ever done, lavishing plunder, spoil, and wealth on them. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. At the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south. So now what we're getting is a narration of Antiochus IV and his military campaigns against the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt in the south. And this actually is the second narration. I skipped some more verses because it just gets awfully wordy, and you can go back and look at those ones I skipped if you'd like to. But there is a first successful military venture that Antiochus IV has against the Ptolemaics in the south. But this is a second venture to the south, but this time it doesn't go so well. For ships of Kittim or Kittim shall come against him, and he shall lose heart and withdraw. He shall be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay heed to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces sent by him shall occupy and profane the temple and fortress. They shall abolish the regular burnt offerings and set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with intrigue those who violate the covenant, but the people who are loyal to their God shall stand firm and take action. The wise among the people shall give understanding to many for some days. However, they shall fall by sword and flame and suffer captivity and plunder. When they fall victim, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join them insincerely. Some of the wise shall fall, so that they may be refined, purified, and cleansed until the time of the end, for there is still an interval until the time appointed. So what we're getting here is the narration now in Daniel of events that are actually already happening for the hearers of Daniel, right? This return of Antiochus and his persecutions. Probably what's going on here is that Antiochus goes south again, thinking it's going to go really well with his army. And ships of Kittim shall come. So I was looking at what does that mean? Well, this originally meant people from the island of Cyprus. But here it's actually referring to Romans who turned Antiochus back. So at this time, Rome was not the power of the whole Mediterranean world, but they were a power. And the Romans were actually allies of the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt. The first time Antiochus marches down to Egypt against the Ptolemaic Empire, the Romans are pretty distracted because they're fighting wars in Macedonia, in Greece, and they don't have the resources to come down and say anything when their allies, the Ptolemaic kingdom, get attacked. But by this time, this second attack that we get referenced here in verse 30, it's already, that war is wrapped up in Macedonia. And so the Romans send an ambassador. And the story goes that this ambassador from Rome stands alone, on the field and gets in front of Antiochus's army and says, you got to go back. If you don't turn back now, then Rome, the Republic of Rome, is going to be at war with you. And Antiochus says, well, I'll get back to you on that. Well, I'll take that under consideration, and I'll let you know what I think about that. And the story goes that this ambassador from Rome draws a line in the sand and draws this line, a circle all the way around Antiochus, and says to Antiochus, um, if I don't get your answer for what you're going to do before you leave this circle, if you step 1 foot out of this circle without answering me, whether you're going to turn back or you're going to keep going, then you can go ahead and consider yourself at war with Rome. And Antiochus figures that's maybe too much, that he doesn't want to bite off more than he can chew. And so he folds and he says, okay, I'll reconsider. I won't wage this campaign against the southern kingdom, the Ptolemaic Empire. And so he turns around with his tail between his legs a little bit and goes back home to Syria. So he's not in the best of moods when he gets back, when he comes back through Israel, Palestine, on his way back to Syria. And supposedly there are also some rumors circulating about this, because people hear that the army has turned around and is coming home. And so there's some rumors at work that maybe Antiochus has even died. And so it's thought that that might be part of what spurs the Maccabean revolt. In fact, we get some of this referenced in Maccabees, that maybe folks think this is their chance because Antiochus might have been killed in this campaign. So when Antiochus finally comes back through and people have sort of taken advantage of his army's retreat, they preemptively thought they could grab some power if he was gone. Combine that with the fact that he's just been embarrassed by this Roman ambassador, Antiochus is not a happy camper. And so he turns around and treats the Jews really badly, and messes up the temple and takes things from the temple, although some of his predecessors had taken some things from the temple too. But that's where this persecution maybe comes from, is Antiochus's wounded pride might have something to do with it. And Antiochus's pride sort of continues. So again, here the Gabriel, or presumably Gabriel, keeps talking. The king shall act as he pleases. He shall exalt himself and consider himself greater than any god, and he shall speak horrendous things against the God of gods. He shall prosper until the period of wrath is completed, for what is determined shall be done. He shall pay no respect to the gods of his ancestors, or to the one beloved by women. He shall pay no respect to any other god, for he shall consider himself greater than all. He shall honor the God of fortress instead of these, a God whom his ancestors did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortress by the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him, he shall make more wealthy, and shall appoint them as rulers over many, and shall distribute the land for a price. So basically, Antiochus IV, he's getting his way, and he's doing whatever he wants within his own empire, and particularly in his persecutions of the Jews. But it doesn't hold that way. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. So the king of the south here, again, the Ptolemaic Empire, the king of the north being Antiochus. He shall advance against countries and pass through them like a flood. He shall come into the beautiful land, and tens of thousands shall fall victim. But Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites shall escape from his power. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver and all the riches of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow in his train. But reports from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to bring ruin and complete destruction to many. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with no one to help him. So we go from before verse 30, we're getting a narration of sort of the present, that the people hearing hearing the book of Daniel were living, right, with these persecutions. And now we're moving into the assertion from the angel that it's not going to last for Antiochus, that he's going to fall. And it's a decent prediction that he maybe sends his military forces south, and then reports from the east and the north shall alarm him, and maybe that's where the downfall comes from, because there were kingdoms, the Parthians, on the eastern part of the Seleucid Empire, that were causing some trouble already, and actually are going to be the ones for Seleucid empires that come after Antiochus, Seleucid rulers rather, in the Seleucid Empire after Antiochus. Those rulers during their time, the Parthians in the east, are going to cause a lot of trouble and basically reduce the Seleucid Empire from a true empire to just like sort of a regional power in Syria. But the word is he's going to be between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain, so presumably between the Mediterranean and Jerusalem somewhere, and he shall come to his end with no one to help him. So I'm calling this whole section's visions of the past future here in chapter 11, because we talked about this. Daniel is written down somewhere between 167 BC and 164 BC. How do we know that? Well, the persecutions of the Jews don't start until 167 or 168, one of those two. And by 164, Antiochus has died. And so they probably wouldn't be raging against Antiochus quite so much in Daniel if he'd already died, right? So that's when it's all written down there in between 167 and 164. But narratively, these things that the angel is revealing are gonna happen. They start happening in 537, right? So really what's being revealed to the hearers of Daniel, the first hearers, is stuff that's already happened. Now, maybe there's a narrative tradition to this, maybe not. But in the narrative, it's supposed to be future, right, narratively, but it's already happened. So, I mean, what do we do with that then? Is this just like phony prophecy? Like, let's write it down like it happened 400 years ago. This was all announced to Daniel. And oh, wasn't it convenient that he didn't tell anybody? I mean, is this a fake? What do we do with it? Obviously, it'd be good if we could have some discussion on this, but we're not in the same room. So let me just say, you can come to some of your own conclusions about this, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about it if you want to talk sometime. But we have to think about what this book, this Apocalypse of Daniel, is intended to do, right? It's not a historical account. So it doesn't have to be that this book is written down, in the 500s BC, and then lays out all these future events that were only discovered later, right? The writing was discovered later. That's not what this is about. It's written to make the point that God is in control of history, even when things are not going well for the people of God, and when the people of God are getting beat up on by these other powers. And remember, the implication of that in ancient Near Eastern thought was that if you are getting destroyed militarily, if you are being occupied and being subjected to foreign powers, the implication of that was that your God is not so great, that this foreign God must be better because the foreign God's people are winning. Must mean that the foreign God has defeated your God. Well, the book of Daniel is written to give people another framework for hope in God, right? For trust in God, that even though things look bad, that, hey, it could be that this is just God's plan, right? That God allowed these things to happen, that God is still the one in control, but that God lets this happen. That's the sense that these historical events are being revealed. I don't think we have to lose our faith in what this book has to say to us, just because probably these predictive kind of prophecies are actually recorded after all this history has happened. And I mean, if you look at the 11th chapter, things that I skipped, it's pretty clear we're narrating history that's already happened, right? There's not a lot of room for debate on that. So I don't worry about that, though. What this is about is letting us know that that God is yet in control. So if we read it that way, I think it's still true, still helpful for us. Okay, so on to the last chapter of Daniel, which references resurrection some here, which, ooh, that's sort of a big deal for us. So right after, let me go all the way back here, right after the time of the end, where Antiochus shall come to his end with no one to help him, we get, at that time, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise. So here again, here's that sort of where the tradition develops that Michael is the protector of the Jewish people. There shall be a time of anguish such as never occurred since nations first came into existence. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, keep the words secret and the book sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be running back and forth, and evil shall increase. Right, again, convenient, a good narrative device that Daniel was supposed to keep this secret and sealed until 400 years later, right? Then it could be revealed. But as we look at this sort of apocalyptic imagery here of the time of anguish, right, such as never occurred before, well, the people probably think they're living that, right? Because everything's going terrible. Have you ever had that sense that the world is falling apart and everything's going terrible? Maybe that's why these words are written here, right? It's not so much for us to take and predict when the end of the world is going to be based on a time of anguish. But if we are living in a time of anguish, maybe we ought to have comfort, right? That this is a precursor to God being in control fully and visibly. Then I, Daniel, looked, and two others appeared, one standing on the bank of the stream, and one on the other, on this bank and one on the other. One of them said to the man clothed in linen, who was upstream, how long shall it be until the end of these wonders? The man clothed in linen, who was upstream, raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by the one who lives forever that it would be for a time, 2 times, and a half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be accomplished. I heard, but I could not understand. Yeah, me either. So I said, my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? He said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are to remain secret and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be purified, cleansed, and refined, but the wicked shall continue to act wickedly. None of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. From the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that desolates is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Happy are those who persevere and attain the 1,335 days. But you go your way and rest. You shall rise for your reward at the end of days. Okay, that's the end of the book of Daniel, right? Here's the folks on the opposite banks, right? And here we get them a little more shiny, which is always fun. And one more shiny of the ones standing on the opposite banks. Okay, so what do we do with the interpretation here on chapter 12? Well, okay, a lot of it is the same as we've been doing over and over throughout the book, what I call the broken record of Daniel here. And that is, God is in control, even if it doesn't seem like it, right? That's what these announcements are about, these predictions. They're about saying, hey, look, God is going to make this right, so just hang tight. God is still in charge, right? And you know what? Those folks who are making a mockery of God and the people of God, who it seems like their gods must be more powerful because they're the ones oppressing you, they're going to get theirs. And that includes the rulers and those who are not wise. We got these references here to the wise, and maybe what's going on there is that in the time of the persecutions of Antiochus, there were some people who thought maybe this would be easier on everybody if instead of pitching a big fit about Antiochus's persecutions and religious interference, what if we just don't make a big deal of it? Then wouldn't it be easier on us? So those folks were not viewed particularly well by the author of Daniel, the writer of Daniel. They weren't wise, right? So both in chapter 11 and chapter 12, you get those references to the wise. And they're going to get the folks who are unwise and who aren't faithful, they're going to get theirs too, right? And this, I think, is less about you get reference that that many will be awakened, and some of them will be awakened to pleasant things and some unpleasant things. And I think that's less about how we build a theology of judgment, how we build a theology of salvation. It's not about how we think about a theology of heaven and hell. I think what that's more about is the themes that everything else of the book of Daniel is about, right? The context, where this is about encouraging faithfulness. People are being persecuted. It is not going well. Daniel is trying to give people a picture that helps them to remain faithful in this, which in this case may be that reference to rewards for the wise and unpleasant things for the unwise. But I'm not sure that we generalize that to our theology as a whole. At least we don't build our theology as a whole based only on these passages. But it is important to note here in chapter 12, a lot of folks interpret this as a reference to the resurrection, right? Everyone who is found written in the book will be delivered. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. That does sound like pretty in line with how the church is then going to come along and think about the resurrection, right? So that this is maybe an early precursor to the resurrection that that we build our faith on, right? The resurrection of Jesus, and looking forward to the resurrection in the fullness of time. I think some of our language and some of the ways that we think about that probably comes here from Daniel. And then on interpretation, just to say, I don't have any idea. Nobody has any idea, as best I can tell, what these timelines given to Daniel mean at the end of chapter 12, where we get the time and 2 times and a half a time. And then in verse 11 here, it says, there shall be 1,290 days. Okay, 1,290. And in the very next verse, it says, happy are those who persevere and attain the 1,335 days. Well, that's not the same number. What in the world does that mean? The note in my Bible says, no satisfactory explanation can be given for these new numbers. The time is uncertain. So whether there was some meaning there for the original hearers that we just don't understand culturally, we've lost, or whether the angel was just trying to say something incomprehensible, we just don't know, right? So some final conclusions on the book of Daniel as a whole. Again, I've enjoyed walking through this, and I appreciate you all, and thanks for sticking with me on video today. If things come up and you want to catch me, send me an email. Is probably the easiest way. That way I can get back to you more thoroughly when I have time, rather than in a hallway, something I don't really have my head wrapped around, but happy to talk further. Basically, in the first 6 chapters, we get these role models who are sort of these legendary, heroic folks, Daniel and his friends who thrive because they're faithful in difficult circumstances. The back half of the book, 7 through 12, you get these visions of the people of God being delivered from the current unpleasantness, right? And this hope that there is a kingdom that is to come, that will be forever and will be just, and God will be in control. And the assertion from all of these chapters is basically that through all of this, God is actually the one in control, even if it doesn't seem like it. God is the one in charge. Again, here I'm a broken record, but this is all the point of all of this, is to encourage and console the Jewish people facing this persecution under Antiochus IV. So I think that's how we ought to read this book too, as encouragement and consolation, encouragement to faithfulness, and a reminder for us too that God is in control, even when it seems like the world is not going well. So to the extent that Daniel is a comfort to you and brings consolation to you, thinking through God's sovereignty, I think we ought to read Daniel, and we ought to trust in that promise that God is in control of history. But if you are somebody for whom the imagery is too upsetting or off-putting or confusing or whatever, I think just don't worry about it, right? The whole point of this book is not to build some Trinitarian theology for Christians. The whole point is to encourage and console people in persecution, people who are being oppressed. And we're not really in that situation right now. Now, there's plenty of reasons to be upset about the state of the world, don't get me wrong. So I think Daniel has a place for us. And certainly love these stories of faithfulness in hard times. I think that's wonderful, and I think it's a great inspiration. But I just want you to know that if it is more disconcerting to you than comforting to interpret this apocalyptic imagery, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I don't think you have to wring your hands over Daniel, because the whole point is to bring encouragement and consolation. So thank you for being part of this study. Let's close with prayer if we can. Gracious Lord, we give you thanks for your faithfulness to your people in all times and places. Sometimes, Lord, that faithfulness plays out in the ways that nations act and behave themselves. And unfortunately, Lord, a lot of times it doesn't. Help us, God, to be inspired by folks who remain faithful to your call and your way, despite opposition, despite consequences by the people in charge. For us, Lord, the ultimate example of that is our Lord Jesus, who was killed by an empire for preaching the good news and bringing healing. But we know, Lord, that story of Jesus does not end with death, but with resurrection. Inspire us, Lord, to also be faithful through difficult times. Inspire us, Lord, by the stories in the book of Daniel. Inspire us, Lord, by the ministry of your son, Jesus. Inspire us, Lord, to trust and hope in the resurrection that promises that the powers of this earth don't have the last word, not even the power of death. That power is with the Lord of life, that power, Lord, the last word is in you, and it's a word of hope and resurrection. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody.